Hey guys, welcome to my booktube channel. This is my first booktube video, so I will apologise if I'm a little bit nervous. I just figured that I'd do a video just to chat about all the books I read in August. So in August I read 15 books. I'll have a little graphic here somewhere of all of the books I read, how many were audio, sort of my ratings in case you're interested in the stats side of things. So that should be on the screen here, and yeah, we'll just get started. So the first book I read in August was actually an audiobook, so I don't have it to hold up, but I will put a picture here. So the first book I read this month was which will be displayed on the screen here, was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I read Gallant in July and really loved it. It is the first V.E. Schwab I've read, although somewhere up here you might not be able to see it, it might be on a higher shelf. I do have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I just haven't got around to it yet. But yeah, so the first book I read was A Darker Shade of Magic. I really enjoyed it. I loved sort of like the urban setting, sort of felt a little bit sort of medievally. I loved the fact that it was all set in different Londons and the differences sort of between the different cities in these different realms. We follow Kel, who I loved his character so much. I really enjoy a character who's sort of, you know, a little bit sarcastic, a little bit grumpy. So I really loved Kel. And I also thought Delilah was so much fun as well. So I loved following both of them through their adventure. So that was the first book I read this month. I gave it 5 stars. As I said, I just thought it was great. Good fun time. It was perfect when I was walking to and from work. But yeah, so that was book number 1. So the second book that I read in August was The Children of Green Now, which is this one here. It's a very old copy. It's by Lucy M. Boston. It's sort of set in, I'm not sure what the exact time period is, but it's set in sort of, you know, old-timey England, sort of English countryside. It was a book that I read as a kid. I've been having a rough month, so there will be quite a few sort of childhood book rereads this time, but again, I love this book. I loved it when I read it as a kid. It did terrify me as a kid, which obviously as an adult, not as scary anymore. But I had a great time reading it. I thought that the tension was built really well throughout. It sort of had an almost like a gothic horror feel, but sort of in like a kid-friendly way. So I, you know, read this, enjoyed it, gave it 4 stars. I think obviously a lot of that was nostalgia. I think if you were, you know, an adult looking to pick up a book nowadays and you were looking for something that was atmospheric and spooky, if you wanted like a quick read, this would be perfect, but it's not going to hit the same as like an adult sort of gothic setting book would hit. But yeah, I love it so much. My copy is quite beaten up, as I'm sure you can tell, but it is from like the 70s. So, but yeah, read this, rated it 4 stars, absolutely loved it. It's got ghosts, it's got a creepy tree, it's got some spooks. As I said though, it is aimed at children, so don't go into it expecting it to be like super scary, but it is definitely great fun. And if you are sort of, you know, a bit like me, having a rough time and you can find it, I do think it's a great read, and it's very enjoyable. So it is a little bit slow paced. I think a lot of that has to do with the time it was written in as well. It's sort of, you know, it was written in the 50s, so it's sort of got that like slow drawn out feel to it, which I quite like in books, but it may not be your cup of tea. So the next book that I read, another childhood reread, it is The Snow Spider by Jenny Nimmo. This is set in Wales, again, it doesn't say an exact time period, but the book was published in the 80s. I feel like it's probably set not much before then. You know, the characters do have some sort of modern conveniences in terms of sort of like when they would have been in the 80s, so like TV's mentioned, stuff like that. So but yeah, we follow this little boy here, and he discovers that he's a magician, and it's just a really fun, cozy read for me. It's got a lot of nostalgia. I read it for the first time when I was quite young, so I do really love this book. I would tell you his name, but it's Welsh and I will butcher it. But yeah, so this is actually the book that inspired my mum to name me Rhiannon, so that's sort of a cool link to it. Again, it was 4 stars. Great fun if you're looking for a cozy quick read, and you don't mind like picking up a childhood book. It does do a really good job, I think, of tackling some themes of grief, because just sort of some of the stuff that happens in the book, and it's handled in what I think is a really good way, but is still sort of approachable for children. If you do have kids and you happen to be watching, it's definitely not a bad pick for to give to sort of, I would say, an older child, sort of, you know, between 9 and 12. But yeah, it was definitely good fun. Loved it. Another 4 star. The next book, changing pace a little bit, the next book I read was Nails and Eyes by Kaori Fujino, I think. It's a collection of 3 short horror stories. The first story in this, which is Nails and Eyes, I thought was great fun. I do like sort of your more graphic body horror stuff. I will just say, in case the title doesn't give it away, if you are squeamish about anything sort of happening to people's eyeballs, this won't be a good pick for you. But I loved it. I also find the cover just really satisfying to look at. I like the colours and the layout, which I know isn't why you should pick up a book, but I did like the content as well. So the first story was definitely my favourite. It's also the longest of the 3, but the other 2 short stories weren't bad. I just feel like, following on from sort of the very graphic, very horrific first story, they sort of fell a little bit flat for me, but overall I liked it. It was another 4 star. As I said, my favourite was probably the first story, and then the other 2, as I said, weren't bad, but I just think maybe reordering them might have done it some favours if like you read the 2 shorter ones first and then Nails and Eyes to sort of have that like gut punch of horror like towards the end of the book. But it was definitely enjoyable. I love a good horror, and this definitely sort of scratched that horror itch that I had earlier on in the month. So yes, that was Nails and Eyes. The next book that I read in August, I will have here. It was another audiobook, Paladins Grace by T. Kingfisher. I love T. Kingfisher. I read What Moves the Dead last year, I think towards the end of last year, and absolutely fell in love with it. And since then I've read A House with Good Bones and Thornhedge as well, and for me at least, T. Kingfisher never misses. So this was no exception. I loved A Paladin's Grace so much. I loved like our paladin character Stephen. I loved Grace. I loved all of the characters. They all sort of kept me intrigued. I loved the mystery element. I loved the romance element. I just thought it was so good. I am really excited to continue on in the story, in the series, and luckily for me they are all available on Everand. So sort of as and when I have space, may not be in September. I have quite a busy TBR in September, which I will talk about in probably in my next video or the video after that. But yeah, I'm really excited to continue on in the series. I just thought it was fantastic, really. I think if you're into D&D, you'll love it, even if you're not and you just like fantasy, but maybe you're not in the mood for something that's super high fantasy. Yeah, it's just a really lovely book, and I thought it was really enjoyable. I gave it 5 stars. It's definitely up there with one of my favourite books, but then a lot of T. Kingfisher's books are up there with my favourite books, so that's no surprise for me at least. But yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing on in the series. So the next book that I read, I did read it predominantly on Audible, but I do have a physical copy here, was The Pale House Devil by Richard Cadre. I picked this up because it was a short book and I wanted something that wasn't going to take me too long to read. I think the audiobook was only a couple of hours, so I listened to it like on the way to and from work in one day. But I was actually surprised with how much I liked this. It is very short, so you know, it's not a big book. Very digestible. It sort of gave me similar vibes to Shaun of the Dead, just with sort of the banter of our 2 main characters. There is a monster involved, so it is sort of that typical sort of monster horror, but there's also a lot of humour in it, and I just thought it was really well done, which, you know, I sort of went into the book with no expectations. I just wanted something quick to read, and this definitely hit the spot. I really enjoyed it. You will find I had a really good reading month, so a lot of these books I really enjoyed. But yeah, this was a good one. We follow predominantly 2 main characters that are sort of like a hitman duo, and they get hired for this job at the Pale House, and things sort of don't go to plan. I don't really want to say anything more, just obviously because of how short the book is. But yeah, it was great fun. I think I gave it 4 stars. Did I give it 4 stars? I did. I gave this 4 stars. I have some notes down here. So if I'm looking down there, it's just so I can check my notes. The next book that I read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I've sort of been trying to get to some of my classics. They've never been something that's hugely interested me, but I think that's just I haven't really given them much of a chance. And obviously it's something that you're sort of forced to read a little bit at school. So I think I sort of rebelled against that and was just like, no, classics aren't for me. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I did find that it was a bit slow, especially this is sort of the not the original from the 1800s, but the actual like writing in it. It's the unabridged sort of original text, just obviously rebound in paperback form. So I did find that some of the language being quite old. I did find that sort of, I was stumbling over it a little bit, but I loved Mary Shelley's descriptions of sort of the landscapes. I loved a lot of the settings that we were in. I thought I knew the story of Frankenstein, and it turns out I didn't at all. So that was quite nice. And yeah, I just think sort of, if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth giving it a go. If sort of the older style of language is a little bit daunting, I think there are sort of republished versions that are like a little bit more digestible. But this is just sort of what I had on hand. And yeah, I liked it. Again, it's relatively short, so I don't really want to tell you sort of more about what happens. Especially with it being Frankenstein, sort of everyone knows the gist of Frankenstein, but it was very enjoyable, and I found some of the parts very surprising. And yeah, it was another 4-star, I believe. Oh no, sorry, I was mistaken. This was a 5-star read for me. So clearly I massively enjoyed it. The next book that we have to talk about is it was my first sort of longer physical read of the month, and that was the Threedaras by Katie Watson. In this book, we follow 3 actresses that all play a character, Dahlia Lively, who isn't this universe's version of Miss Marple, because Miss Marple and Agatha Christie do exist within sort of this universe, but they're sort of, you know, Dahlia Lively is very much a Miss Marple, Hercule Poirot sort of character, and we follow 3 actresses who have or are going to play her. Something happens at the house and they solve the mystery. I'm not going to say what the mystery is. I'm not going to say how it's solved because that would spoil the book for you. But I thought it was fantastic. It was actually a birthday gift from one of my friends 2 years ago, so it's taken me quite a while to get to it. But I loved it. I think I read it in one day. Absolutely devoured it. Loved the mystery. I am very much a mystery girly, so I loved the mystery in this, and I loved our characters. Sort of, you know, a very unlikely trio that get pulled together, and it was just a very cozy sort of, you know, easy read for me. So yeah, that was the 3 Dahlias. This was another 5-star. Absolutely loved it. We'll be continuing on in this series. I just need to get the second book, which my local Waterstones does not have in stock, so I will need to order in. The next book that I read this month was Emins Moon. This is the sequel to The Snow Spider. It's part of a trilogy. There's The Snow Spider, Emins Moon, and The Chestnut Soldier, I believe. So I read Emins Moon this month. There's not really much I can say, obviously, without going into spoilers. But we follow a new character, sort of in this book. There are still characters from sort of the first book, and we sort of, there's a little bit more of like a mystery to this one, and again, it was a childhood reread. I really enjoyed my experience rereading it, and I would say, if anything, this is sort of the spookiest of the 3 children's books that I read, but it is still a children's book, so do manage your expectations a little bit if you go into it expecting spooks. But yeah, it was great fun. I loved sort of like the mystery elements, a little bit of that like spooky horror vibe, and I just think it's a really sweet book series. I love it being set in Wales. It's somewhere that I've visited quite often. Obviously, we're living in the UK, it's not hugely far from me, so great fun. Emins Moon, I gave this another 4 stars, I do believe. Especially with children's books, I don't think they're ever going to be a 5-star, just because obviously with being 27, there's not really a lot that surprised me. I don't think it's always going to be an all-time favourite, but they are definitely sort of they are definitely sort of close to my heart. Again, a lot of that probably plays into the nostalgia that I have, but if you do have kids, I think they are great options for children. So the next book that I read was Ari Adne by Jennifer Saint. I read Circe in 2022, and I read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker last year, and I enjoyed both of those a lot. So I do think sort of, I think it would depend on the Greek retelling. I did read Medusa a little bit earlier on in the year. It was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It was enjoyable. But I do tend to like sort of Greek retellings. I think I do better with the ones that are a little bit longer as well. But obviously this follows the story of Ari Adne and King Minos and the Minotaur. And obviously Theseus as well. So you sort of they're the characters that you're following. I must admit, I went into this not really, I knew about this sort of the story of the Minotaur in the Labyrinth, but I didn't know much more than that. I sort of had a very basic understanding of sort of what the story was. So I found this really enjoyable, sort of learning more about it, being in the point of view of Ari Adne. Obviously, I know it's not true to sort of the classic Greek myth, but I did think it was very enjoyable. And I mean, the cover is stunning as well, which I think always helps. If you're picking up a book, you want it to be a pretty book as well. Like, so yeah, that was another really enjoyable read. I think it was this was another 5 stars. I love the Greek retellings, and this one definitely sort of hit what I was looking for. So yeah, Ari Adne by Jennifer Saint was another 5-star for me. We then followed that up with Cursed Bunny, which I will have a picture of the cover here, by Bora Chung. I did read this physically, but I lent my physical copy to my little sister because I am trying to rope her into also being a horror girly. But I thought it was fantastic. I really loved the mix that we get throughout the short stories of sort of sci-fi, speculative fiction, like folk tales, and then some like true horror. There are some really bonkers stories in that book. The first one in particular, sort of, I read that and I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but overall it was great. I loved a lot of the stories. Some of them are on the longer side, some of them are only a couple of pages, which I think is always a good mix. And I loved the different style of genres. I've not read many sort of short story collections, so that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting when I went into it, but I did find really enjoyable. I think the ones that I loved the most tended to be sort of like the more folksy sort of ones. But all of them were sort of 3 stars or above. So in my opinion, you can't really expect much more than that, apart from, you know, every story sort of being enjoyable. That overall I gave a 4.25. I took my ratings sort of for each story and divided them by how many stories there were and got a 4.25. So yeah, definitely enjoyable. I would recommend it if you're sort of into horror, but it is weird, so if you're not into weird horror, it may not be for you. But I did really enjoy it. There's a bit of sci-fi, a bit of speculative, as I said, some folk tales, just overall really enjoyable. Following on from that, I read How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. I thought that this was okay. It was definitely enjoyable. I feel it was a little bit predictable. None of the characters really are good people or likeable, apart from one character who isn't in the book long. I won't tell you who the one character I found likeable was because it may be a bit of a spoiler. But yeah, it was okay. I gave it a 3-star. I did enjoy it. I don't think it's one that I'm likely to reread anytime soon. I am intrigued. It's been picked up for, I think, a Netflix series, and Anna Taylor-Joy is playing our main character Grace. So I am interested in that. I will probably give the series a try and sort of see how that goes. But as I said, it was enjoyable. It just wasn't anything special. A bit predictable. It was fine. Moving on from that, I read the Starless SE by Erin Morgenstern. I know that this is very hit or miss for people, but I loved this. Like, I loved this book so much that I'm actually debating getting a tattoo based on this book. In case you didn't know, I am working on a book sleeve. The camera is not the right angle to show you this, but I do have this tattoo here, which is inspired by the Veronica Speedwell series. I have a Harry Potter tattoo on my shoulder. that I got sort of before all of the stuff about J.K. Rowling came out. I plan on getting a Legends and Lattes tattoo because I love Legends and Lattes. And I will also be getting a Starless SE inspired tattoo because I loved it. The writing is beautiful. I loved sort of the adventure that we follow, sort of, you know, with our mix of characters. I loved sort of like the budding romance that we had. Yeah, I thought it had really good rep. I just thought it was great. I will admit, for most of the book I had not a single clue what was going on, but I quite like that sometimes in books. It very much sort of gave me the vibes of if Piranesi and the Wayward Children had a baby, with sort of like the doorways and being in this sort of mystical nonsense world, really. So if you liked both of those, I'd definitely give this a try and see if it's up your alley. I do know it's hit or miss though. It's not for everyone, and it is a chunky book as well, which I think could be a bit intimidating for people, but I loved it. I would highly recommend it. That was the Starless SE. So following on from that, I read the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. I picked this up, it must have been last year, if not the year before. Having never read a Brandon Sanderson, I do also own Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which is up there somewhere. I have Tress of the Emerald Sea on Audible, but I do want to get it in the hardback cover as well, so I have all of sort of the Kickstarter projects, and I have Final Empire up here that I need to read at some point. So I sort of went in hard for Brandon Sanderson, having never read any of his work, because all of these books I read before I purchased before I'd read this one. But I read this most recently, and I loved this book so much. I cannot explain to you how much I loved this book. I thought it was really well written. I loved the adventure and the storyline that we're following. I loved like the espionage vibes. I loved the humour in it. Let me see if I can find you an example, because the illustrations are fantastic as well. But like the illustrations are great. I loved sort of the mixed media element. I'm trying to find one of the little wizard drawings because they're my favourite. Yeah, so I sort of, you know, I loved these sort of illustrations with this like wizard guy. I thought it was perfect. I'm really excited to sort of get to some of his other work now. But yeah, we follow a dude who ends up in medieval England and has no idea how he got there, who he is, what's going on, and we unravel the mystery along with him, whilst also trying to learn about this world that he has no idea about, and fight crimes. But yeah, it was great fun. I would highly recommend this. I already have 2 people that want to borrow this from me, so but yeah, it was a great book. And then we finished off the book with just we finished off the month with just a short little novella, which is What Feasts at Night. As I said, I'm a Tea Kingfisher girly. This is a Tea Kingfisher. This is the second in the Sworn Soldier series, the first of which is What Moves the Dead, which is based on the Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. I thought that this was fantastic. It took me a little while to get into, which I wasn't expecting, because What Moves the Dead I read really quickly, but I did listen to that on audio, so I don't know if that's maybe why. I did also start reading this very late at night, so that probably didn't help. But yeah, it's great. We follow, I'm not great with book character names. We follow the same characters that we do in What Moves the Dead. They're back in their hometown, and something's going on that they're trying to beat. Again, with how short it is, there's not really much I can say about this other than the fact that it was hugely enjoyable. I loved it so much. And yeah, as I said, at least for me, Tea Kingfisher always hits. This was no exception. So that was... that's all of the books that I read in August, at least all of the ones that I have here to show you. Pretty decent stack. And yeah, it was just a really great reading month. I do now need to sort of find somewhere to put these books back on the shelf, so wish me luck with that. And if you're interested, stay tuned, because my next, well, either my next video or the one after it will be my September TBR, and I'm also going to do a video discussing what I have picked for covers with Cassidy's spooky season challenge, which I will be taking part in over September, October and November, because spooky season is the best season. So yeah, if you're interested and you'd like to see more, please feel free to subscribe. If you liked the video, please drop us a like, and I will be back shortly with the next video. Bye!